Hi, welcome to mediatorpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a valuation expert and divorce financial mediator in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, we're talking with Rosalia Labate. She's located in New York, and she's a certified divorce financial analyst and certified public accountant. She provides services such as financial forensics, tracing assets, lifestyle analyses, and business valuations. We've actually been doing a little bit of a series, and we'll be talking to you every month. But today we're talking about divorce mediation consulting and how preparation is necessary. So welcome, Rosalia. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you, Melissa, for having me.
Of course. Well, we usually get pretty into negotiation, financial analyses, and things like that. But today we're talking about why somebody should start with a settlement offer when they're going into mediation. And part of this is based on a conversation that you and I have a lot, which is if you're trying to figure out if you're getting divorced and you don't know what the first thing to do, a lot of times financial professionals are saying to reach out to a financial professional before maybe reaching out to an attorney. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But one of the things to consider is that if you enter with a settlement offer, and we'll talk more about what that actually entails, but just coming up with a plan, a strategy that has some financial basis, especially if you have some complexity in the finances, may be a better step than talking to the attorney first. And Rosalia, what do you think about that concept of maybe first working with a settlement offer or just getting maybe your financial ducks in a row, right? And really looking at what's the big strategy, what's the big plan, and is an attorney part of that plan or are they the whole plan, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I view it as you've got to go to the professional that provides whatever they specialize in. I know we've had conversations about this in the past. As far as the financial professional, I I was just on the phone with a client. She's hiring me and she hasn't even picked out an attorney yet. It's very important that you know as much as you can before stepping foot into mediation. It if not for anything, it lowers the emotional temperature that you have going in there. I mean, look, divorce is difficult enough, and going in completely unarmed, unaware of what's going to happen, um, that could be a recipe for disaster.
Mhm.
And I think that getting an understanding of your financial situation, if you can come up with a settlement offer before even going in there, that is the ideal situation you can find yourself in. That means that you know what your finances are. That means that you're armed with information. That means that you can speak to everyone in that room from a different level of understanding. And you always have your attorney, be it your consulting attorney, to discuss it with and to get information from a legal perspective from.
Yeah.
But I go to the financial professional for the financial information.
Well, and what people don't realize is when you hire an attorney, you're kind of throwing that first grenade over the wall, right? And the other thing is you're going to hire an attorney and you're going to pay a retainer. It could be 5, 10, 25,000, depending upon the state that you're in or the complexity of your case. And the first thing they're going to do is come up with your property statement, which is a list of your assets and your liabilities or your debts and your property. And then they're going to look at your income and expenses. So they're going to look at your tax returns. They're going to be like, okay, what are you making? What are they making? Do you have kids? All of these are financial basics for the divorce. So you're going to go right through your initial retainer with your attorney, looking at financial things from a legal lens. And realistically, what we suggest is knowing some of the financials before you go into the attorney is going to then put you in the driver's seat. And so then you are saying, hey, attorney, here's my settlement offer. And maybe you can't come up with a full offer, and we'll talk about more of what that looks like. But here's what I have. Here's a summary of the biggest issues that I feel, custody is an issue, or alimony is an issue, or missing assets are an issue, or a business is an issue, right? But you're starting with sort of those main issues. You're developing them out with a financial, and this could be preparation of a month or 3 to 6 months or even longer, depending upon the complexity. And assuming that an attorney can understand financial statements and tax returns at the same level as a valuation expert, a CPA, or somebody in the financial divorce consulting realm is ludicrous, in my opinion. Yet, what we think of is, well, I got to call that attorney. I got to start the process. Now, once that process starts, now you got a time ticking on the court clock of you better do this, you better do that. You don't even have a concept of where the money is or what money you have. And you're hoping that the attorney is going to lead you down that path. And what we find is they may not be able to lead you down the path. And the next step after they've gone through your retainer and done some of this preliminary information to just file the claim, right? Then they talk to a financial expert, and we look at everything and say, wait, how did you fill this out? Like, where's all this information coming from? Is this accurate? Did you include everything? Well, the attorney gave me a checklist and I filled it out. And so I did it to the best of my capability, and then they filed it. And that's the story that happens a lot of times at the very beginning.
Yeah, over and over again. And I think, I want to add that when you're working in divorce world, if you will, I think it's really important to get someone that specializes in divorce world. So yes, I'm a CPA, but I'm also a certified divorce financial analyst. I work in divorce. A large portion of my practice is divorce related, as is yours, I believe. Because I get that. Can I use my accountant? My accountant's a CPA. Can I use my CPA tax preparer? They don't know what we know. And obviously we don't know what they know. I don't want to know what they know. I want to know what I need to know to help you. And yes.
And your CPA could have a conflict. Like your CPA, if they've been doing your personal tax returns, then they are basically an employee of both of you and your spouse. And the reality is that becomes a conflict, because if they talk to you about something, they may also need to disclose that information to the other party. And again, a lot of times clarity in the financials is great. Use the CPA or your personal CPA to tell you the facts and the basis of the tax returns, or the basis of where some of your holdings are. But a lot of times, most even business owners, they're just feeding the information directly to the CPA. And the CPA is just like, again, checking the boxes, filling out the things, maybe not looking at the underlying bank statements, maybe not reconciling the bank statements, certainly not looking to see if there are personal expenses being run through the business. They're just like, well, Bobby told me that he spent $50,000 on entertainment. I didn't go check and see if those were sports tickets, or, like one client I had a VIP membership to maybe a XXX rated place, right, that they were running through. And that was the first thing that he said in his divorce. He's like, so how confidential is what I tell you? And so understanding the role of that financial is going to be very important, as well as you need somebody that's going to give you a realistic expectation of what you're going to deal with when you get to court or you go through mediation from a financial aspect. A lawyer knows the law, and even if they have an LLM, right? Even if they have some other specialty training, they're trained in the law And financial people are trained in the business of getting divorced from a financial aspect. They're not going to necessarily know the ins and outs of a quadro or the tax effects of a retirement asset, and they can't prove, even the tracing of assets. You have to have an expert witness that's going to provide that information to the attorney.
Exactly. I mean, that the attorney wants to run with the legal ball, right? So once the attorney, gets that legal ball in place, they're off to the races. And, they now control the situation. Whereas I want to put my clients in the driver's seat so they understand the financial side of it and they've got that covered. There are there are so many facets to a divorce that need to be understood. You need a team, you need a village. You really do. And I think that applies for mediation as well.
Absolutely. One of the things that we want to talk about, and when we prep for mediation, so a thing to understand in litigation is that you don't have to call an attorney. You don't have to just file the paperwork to get divorced. You could actually plan a little bit to get divorced, which means you can collect some of the financial data. You can get your tax returns or your bank statements. You can start to download recent statements of all of your other assets or request them from your spouse. Can I have access and online access to those accounts? That's going to be the first step of whether they say yes or no, is going to determine whether this is going to be a little bit of an easy process or not. But what we talk about is that you need to know your numbers before you attend the first mediation. And now this is kind of going straight at mediation, but in most states, if you have kids or even most judges don't want to hear very complex financial issues in court. They're not even very prepared to always deal with those. So a lot of times they're pushing mediation and the attorneys are saying, well, let's go to mediation and we'll just wing it. We'll just see if everybody comes with information, and you're almost defaulting. If you're not the business owner, you're hoping that they come with some additional information about the business valuation. And the reality is most of the time, everybody comes unprepared. And if you come unprepared, you're probably going to walk away unsettled, right? And so if that's a term, I don't know, maybe we coined it, but the reality is you need to know your numbers going into that first mediation, and that could actually give you an edge on the other side. If they're just coming in hoping and praying that everything works out, and you have a solid plan, which in our mind is a summary of the biggest issues that you are going to give to the mediator. You might even give it to them beforehand. A settlement offer, which means here's all of our financial things. Here's the house, and I would like to keep it, or the other person wants to keep it, or we're going to sell it. What do you want to do with those assets going into it? And then a parenting plan. Do you want to spend and pay for all of these people to be in mediation so that you start talking about holidays with your spouse? Or do you want to start with a summary? If you are the person that has handled a lot of the household, come in with the offer. Present the offer days before the mediation so that everybody can kind of look at it. A lot of times people are saying, no, don't put that information forward. It gives them a leg up. You're giving them a leg up in knowing what you want, and then they can then come in, and the first thing the mediator is going to do is say, well, what's the current offer? You gave one 7 days ago. Please go to the other side and ask them what is their response or what is their issues with the offer. That actually gives you an idea of what could happen in court based on the same premise of information. And it's your first reality of how overwhelming is this to the mediator. It's going to be just as overwhelming to the judge, right?
Yeah. And I also, I think when you go in there and you're armed, and look, I have clients that have no idea what accounts their spouses have. Absolutely no idea. So if you're going to the mediation and you only know your information, again, that puts the onus on the mediator and on the other side to produce, the numbers that you need so that you have a complete picture. It's very difficult, I find, to come up with a settlement offer without having all the information. I think that getting, you look like a superstar going in there and having done your homework and understanding what's missing. And it's hard. It's hard. It's just a very hard process. And the more information you know, the more information you share, hopefully that moves the mediation process forward. So you're not fighting about insignificant things, as you mentioned.
Well, the missing information is probably the biggest issue in creating a settlement offer. And so attorneys will be like, well, there's too much missing information. We can't come up with something. Then, like I am being brought into a case recently and they hired a valuation expert. I think they paid $10,000 or $15,000. They actually issued a report that said we do not have enough information to develop a value. So I was provided with all the information and they said all we had was one tax return from about 2 years ago. So I see the tax return, I download all the information that's been provided. And interestingly enough, in some of the discovery, they've actually provided additional information, recent information that was included on their personal tax returns that actually showed what some of the values were because the K1s were summarized in the personal tax returns. So I was like, actually, you do have several years of information. And even based on the information provided, I can come up with a preliminary valuation or what we call a reality check, and we can put that in the offer. Now, what it forces the mediator to do, because you go into mediation and now I've put this value on without having all the information. One of two things is going to happen. You're going to go to the mediator and say, we don't have a current tax return. We don't have this information. You should have it in a list that you can give to the mediator that says, here's all the missing documents. Take it to the other side and see when we can get it. Give us a date and time, and then we will have another mediation after we receive the information. So that's step one. Step two is I give a value based on this one piece of information over here, one piece of information over here. But it showed that they either had $500,000 of income or $1 million of income in those two pieces of data. So I would run a range of value going into the mediation and put a number into the offer that then allows me to look at the entire pie in order to split it. Now, what are they going to do at that first mediation? They're going to come telling me I'm wrong, especially if I gave it in advance. They're going to come maybe with documents to prove that I'm wrong, maybe with the information that was missing in order to say, hey, I know you thought that we really make $1 million or 500,000, but our most recent statement is only 200,000. Again, we're not as concerned about what the information means to the value first. We're interested in getting the most recent information. And if you do it in that fashion, you're actually using the mediation to get discovery in a much easier fashion. Or what if they say, you know what, maybe we got close to the value. Maybe with those little pieces of information, we got kind of close to the number that was in the business value, the business owner's head. And now they're willing to sit at the table during that mediation and say, well, the value isn't that high, but, we could agree to a value that's a couple $100,000 lower. Guess what you've saved? You've saved tons of money actually having both valuation people go full bore and do all of this additional work. I mean, do you see that happening in mediation as well?
I do. I also think that a lot of times in mediation, people want simplicity of information. because I see a lot of mediators that don't understand valuation world. It's a very difficult concept for them to grasp. And I know I'm making a generalization, but you know the truth of the matter is it's a very difficult concept to grasp. And so I think if it can be simplified in that manner, where you've also got the mediator on board, it just makes for a much smoother mediation in general. And it makes it easier for the spouses as well. You know, one of the other factors is you have to look and see the trust level of the spouses while they're going through the process. You know, if they're trusting of each other, if they're just verifying numbers, that's one type of valuation. If they don't trust each other, and they want a full blown detailed report, that's a whole other issue. I question whether or not they should be in mediation to begin with.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads us into what are most divorce attorneys doing to prepare for divorce mediation? Nothing, typically. And that's unfortunate because right now, and I get the benefit of being an expert in a lot of different mediations because we're doing mediation where there's a mediator, both sides have a lawyer that's there, and then both sides may also have an expert witness that's talking about the business valuation or tracing the marital assets or, all of these issues. But a lot of times the attorney is kind of sitting back and saying, well, it's a negotiation. Like we'll see what happens when we get there. So when we are counseling clients, and sometimes it's before they have attorneys, but sometimes it's actually in the process of a litigation, we are saying we need to put a summary together that puts everything that you want the mediator to see in writing, but also on that page, you should put what the mediator could share with the other side. And the reason why we do it in this fashion is because you need to get the attorney, the expert, the financial, yourself, all on the same page. When you get to that mediation room, the mediator is not your friend. They are a pawn to put your settlement offer over to the other side. They are a referee to go to the other side and say, this is realistic. What is your perspective? And realistically, you shouldn't be going into the mediation and the mediator says, well, what's your bottom line? And you tell them. If you haven't planned in advance, and we sometimes even prep okay, what to expect in the mediation? What do you say? What do I say? And a lot of times I'm telling my client, you don't get to say yes until I say yes. You don't get to tell your bottom line to anybody. Let me help negotiate and position the expectation of the financials at a certain level, and then see how far they're trying to dial it back. But we're not going to go in and say, oh, you know what, mediator, we would take this. That would be our best case. That mediator is going to go literally to the other room and say, hey, if you come at this, we could probably be done. What does the other side do? They come lower. So you're starting off at already this awkward negotiation because the divorce attorneys are just like, we'll figure out when we get there. There is no plan in place. And so a lot of times creating the strategy means, what can you put in writing? What can you give to them before the mediation? What can you give to them in the mediation? And that should be your rubric for the negotiations, right? Proving your point that something is not separate or something that is separate, or whatever your positions are. You should see how well does that mediator respond to your position, right?
That's an interesting concept. That's a very interesting concept. I mean, here in New York, generally there are consulting attorneys, but they're not present during the mediation process. So it will be the mediator and the spouses going through the mediation. And then, I've been hired for both, right? So I've been hired as the financial neutral working for the couple, but I've also been hired to work specifically with one side. So me and the consulting attorney form your team, and we discuss after the fact what has happened. But we also arm you at the beginning of the mediation so you have an idea as to what's going on. Unfortunately, what I see happening often is that someone is coming to me too late. Another thing that I see is that people don't even realize that you can have a consulting attorney. I actually had a mediator who was working with a couple that was going through the process. They had been working with her for almost 3 years. My client had no idea what a consulting attorney was. No idea whatsoever.
And this is why, like, experts don't normally want to put things in writing. Like, we typically don't want anything in writing because it could be used against us in the future. But the reality is, if you're doing that, if you are just going in and you're going to be with a mediator and your spouse, you have to understand that nobody is there to advocate for you. So if you have your plan on paper, when you get to that mediation, if you're overwhelmed, if you're emotional, if you're tired, or if you're hungry, or any of those things that start to make you confused, right? You revert back to the summary, and you go back to the summary as like, okay, here are my 3 main issues. Here are my suggested solutions to the issues, and the solution is the settlement offer. And then you may have like an additional, because a lot of times when we're going into it, they're like, okay, well, whose offer do we want to start from? I want them to start from yours. I want them to start from your spreadsheets. I want them to start, like we call it anchoring the deal, but you're going to anchor the expectation on your offer, your way of settling it. And a lot of times, at least for the finances or the kids, you may have the solution. And so don't go into mediation expecting the mediator to have a solution to your 20-year divorce, right? That has complexity out the yin yang. They're not going to read a whole bunch of stuff. And if they are, make sure that you've prepped it so that they have a very concise, clean, clear picture. You don't want to overwhelm them with all of these crazy details. So a lot of times the summary is the first thing that we provide, but then you're bringing to the mediation, a couple different pieces. If you had an inheritance and you're like, hey, this is separate, then you're going to maybe want to show some information about that inheritance that really gets the mediator to say, oh, yeah, that looks pretty clear. Now they're going to go to the other side and say, look, they have a position that this is separate. What is your counterbalance to that position? And they may have nothing. And so then the mediator might suggest, well, the judge would probably give some credit to that separate asset. And what are you willing to negotiate? Again, if you don't have a clear picture and you're going into mediation alone or without a consultant or without a financial, then that rubric or the summary is going to be your marching orders. And every time you get distracted or you get confused, go back to reading the summary. Okay, well, can we talk about this issue? Can we talk about this issue? How do we get to this issue? Where are some other, I think we agree on some things. That's going to be, but if you tell the mediator everything, because they come to the room with just you in it and they're confidential, just I really want to know, what would be your best case scenario? No, you're not telling them that. You're telling them what the offer on the table is, and the offer should have some fluff in it. It should have some additional items that you are literally willing to give up in some capacity.
That's interesting. You bring up the concept of inheritance. That's a whole other topic. I think one of our questions is around that, right?
Well, this is a good one. So what do you see us typically financially fighting about in divorce mediation? I know what I think are some of the big issues, and this is one of them, But what else do you see people fighting about? Missing documents, separate assets.
Missing documents, separate assets versus marital assets. What are they? One of the more complex examples I can give you is this concept of deferred assets. So, and this, I'm speaking specifically about New York State right now.
Mm-hmm.
But in New York, sometimes, especially if you're on Wall Street, you'll get a cash bonus, but then you'll get restricted stock units or deferred stock options or things of that nature. And it's not all earned at the same time. So we have a process that we go by, because once you are in the process of divorce, there's a marital component versus a separate component to it all that needs to be calculated. And it could amount to quite a significant amount of money and stock shares, depending on the company. It could be very lucrative stock. So it's one of the things, especially to watch out for. Another example, if someone bought a home, right? I don't know. I'm sure you hear about this all the time. They had the house before they got married. And now, the house is worth X amount of dollars. Well, what do we figure out? Does it all belong to the person who bought the house? Does some of it belong to the person who bought the house? Does all of it belong to the whole marital estate? It all gets divided. These could be, again, it's a significant monetary question that also needs to be addressed.
Oh, absolutely. And I think even just talking about the first one, which is like separate assets or inheritance, because a lot of times you might receive a gift to go buy a house, or you might receive, some inheritance. A lot of times you have to look at the state, and there's going to be specific rules about who needs to prove that it's separate. And typically, if you are saying that something is separate, then you have to go and prove out that situation. Now, we've had another situation in South Carolina where you don't have to prove out it's almost an assumption that if something was held before the marriage, that there's an assumption that it's separate. And so the other party actually has to prove that it's been transmuted or, somehow commingled with marital assets. So in Missouri, you're going to have a different way of proving out. The presumption is that everything is marital unless somebody states and has to prove out that it's separate. And then you have income on separate assets. So you can have the actual, like somebody gifted me $100,000. Okay, that's a separate asset. I've proven that. But over time, it's earned income. And then in Missouri, that income is still marital. And if we flip over to Illinois, the income on separate assets is still separate. So it's very state specific. But if that is of an issue, typically you will see an attorney will get in the ear of somebody and say, oh, you might have a separate asset, and then that could be a way that we could pull that off and you don't have to split it. That's where you get into this fighting a legal case around a separate asset, because that's a legal issue. And then we have to come in and trace it or show, oh, here's the income. And there's a portion of it that's marital, a portion of it that's separate, appreciation, like appreciation in the asset. And these are all very complex financial things that going into mediation may be too much for mediation. But if you don't bring it up, if you don't have a position on it, and you don't bring some proof for it, the mediator might just dismiss it, and it might just be off the table.
Right, exactly. It definitely needs to be addressed. And these are, the nuances of getting divorced, where if you're not working with a financial professional, you may not be aware of it before you walk in that room.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that it involves is not only a separate asset, because like when you talked about RSUs or restricted stock units, sometimes they're not vested, right? And so you're also looking at what is the date of value in your state. Is the date of value the date of separation, which means it doesn't change over time? It's just that date. Well, do you agree to the date of separation, or is there some confusion about what that date is? Is it the date of trial? Well, the date of trial is unknown in the future. So that means that every time we're kind of updating it. If you go into mediation, you would want it to at least be updated as of the date of the mediation. But then we come into a business. And is the separate business, is it really separate, or was there marital contribution to the business? And these are also issues that maybe we should, maybe you can give them a little idea of what that means, either in the state of New York or just in general.
So in New York State, if you started, let's say you started a business 10 years before you got married. So we would look at the value on date of commencement, and that would establish, or date of marriage rather, that would establish part of your separate property, right? And I say part loosely because then you've got to look at, okay, what's the value as of date of commencement? Now, this is a legal term. If you're in mediation, generally, the mediator will work with the couple to determine a cutoff date to use. So you take that cutoff date, value the business as of that cutoff date. Well, what happened in between the date of marriage and the date of commencement? And there's these other concepts of active versus passive appreciation. So was the business owner actively involved in generating that income? Or did the appreciation in the business just come about from economic factors, like because of inflation or passage of time or interest rates or what have you? So very, very, again, complicated circumstances that should be addressed, but they aren't always.
Yeah, and sometimes even in New York, you're not going to get 50-50 of that business regardless, right? There it could be less, but you're trying to figure out all of these pieces. The attorneys don't necessarily know all of the intricacies of this calculation, and it's a gray area, so there's not a lot of case precedent always on these issues because so many people will settle really, really high conflict, highly, like high asset divorces outside of court. So they're not going through and having a judgment declared on these particular items. So you're really looking at what is the issues of the court, but also, in all of these areas, it's going to be better to discuss it in mediation, because if you hire experts to have to go and quantify all of this, you could be easily, for one expert, $25,000 to $50,000 just to figure out if the business is separate or not. And each side is going to have to do that because one side says it's separate, one side said it's not. You also have where somebody might say, well, the one spouse is a 20% owner and the other spouse is an 80% owner, right? And so it's going to depend in that state. Does that mean that they're really 50-50? Well, it may not, right? So you need to understand what the state implications are to that arrangement.
Right. And then you can also fight about, well, the valuation at date of marriage. The other side may not agree on it. The date of commencement value, the other side may not agree on it. Yeah. New York State is an equitable distribution state. So to your point, it's not necessarily 50-50, which people find surprising.
Well, and a lot of separate assets, separate businesses are sometimes family businesses. So they've been in the family for generations, and you have like a third generation getting divorced. And that's where you have this passive and active appreciation. Like, are they just a bean counter and sit at a desk, or are they the main salesperson? Are they the CEO, or are they, accounts receivable person? That implies whether it's passive or active appreciation. And that may be an issue in your state or not. So we're kind of throwing out these terms because you have to look at the state and what to consider in that. The other issue is marital waste or missing assets. So again, these are the areas that you will typically fight about. If you have a bank account that has a number on it, like we're not going to fight about the bank account. The number is the number. But if you have a bank account that said we had $100,000 the day before you filed for divorce and now it's gone, then you're going into mediation. You're saying, hey, can you prove where this money went? And I don't have the money to hire an expert to trace those assets. And so you're saying to the mediator, hey, why don't you have them prove where that money went? And if it was spent on marital purposes, spent on the family, or is it spent on an outside party? So what do you see when you're looking at marital waste or missing assets in the state of New York?
Oh, it runs the gamut. It really runs the gamut. You'll see that $100,000 disappeared, but it's in another bank account. You don't know about it until, in this case, it's mediation. So you hope that the other side will divulge where the money went. But I've seen it in contested matters where you literally had to subpoena the banks to find out that there were other bank accounts and a ton of, and there was so much money siphoned off into those bank accounts. And no one would have known. No one would have had any idea. Because why? Because the financial person comes on board and says, where did this money go? Working hand in hand with the attorney to find out. In terms of marital waste, I find runs the gamut, and it's dependent upon who you're working with. It really, someone can say, $50,000, you're not going to get it. Just forget about it. It's not a lot of money. Someone else may say, oh, $50,000. Let's keep going. Let's see what else we can find.
Yeah. And a lot of times the attorneys might say, listen, there might be a marital waste claim, but it's going to cost a lot of money to calculate it. Let's just worry about that if we get to trial. Let's not worry about that. The problem is if you go into mediation and you don't put it on the table, you can't put it on the table later. And so a lot of times what we're prepping for mediation for a marital waste or missing assets is a summary, a simple summary. Here's 5 transactions. Here's 5 transfers. We would like to have more information about it. Or that is basically you've received some of your marital money already. Right. And so it does impact the negotiations. If there's missing assets, was that depleted? And that now goes on your side of the ledger and you had $100,000, you lost it. And now I want $100,000 of some other asset. And so in my mind, if you don't put together some sort of summary for the mediator to know about this issue, your attorney's going to ignore it, or your consultant could ignore it. Your spouse is going to poo-poo it. Obviously. And so you need some tangible evidence, which means a summary of those 5 transactions, those 5 transfers to accounts that you didn't know about. Because quite frankly, even if you think that your spouse is super shady or super intelligent, there's typically a trail. There's a process, unless you're a fully cash basis business or something like that. It's the money comes in and the money goes somewhere else. So you show them those 5 transactions. I would actually bring the printout of the page of the statement that shows it so that the mediator could actually see it. Now you're coming into mediation with at least those 5 transactions and maybe an assumption that like it looks like he was depleting it or she was depleting it by $10,000 a month times 12 months. That's $120,000. You have to come up with some logical way of showing this position in the negotiation, because if you go to mediation and you can settle it, you can't go and retrade afterwards. You can't go and renegotiate. Oh, I forgot to tell you about that. You probably should have brought it up at the very beginning. So that's typically one area that I see everybody ignore until you get closer to trial. And what if you never get to trial? then it's off the table. And sometimes marital waste or spending money on a significant other could get you attorney's fees if you prove it. Infidelity could get you attorney's fees. So if you're not bringing it up, there's no way to maybe get that info, like, or your expert fees or the fees for the mediation.
Good points. Very good points.
So some of the first steps that I think anybody could take to create a full financial settlement offer is downloading, the last 12 to 18 months of your bank statements, your investment accounts, going back to your financial advisor if you have one and say, can I look at the summary that you've provided to us for the past 3 years? Going to your accountant and getting the past 3 to 5 years of tax returns, working to get any of the issues that have kind of been this like nagging intuition in the back of your head, like, something's not right here. If there's a business, then you might want to request some of that information. But the reality is, to put together a full financial settlement offer is a difficult process, and it could take several months or it could take several weeks. But you first start with a template of like, what do you have and what do you owe and what is the total? And we're trying to split those into 2 buckets. The other is there alimony or child support that's going to come into play? And you can look at like your state and see that there's a calculator sometimes, or you can look at some software programs, but it's really saying, what do I want to do with all of the stuff that we own? Is there going to be a payment out for child support or alimony or maintenance? And then is there a parenting plan that we need to be included? Do we need to do something with the house? Are we going to sell it? Because if you're going to sell anything, you sometimes don't need a value, right? If you're going to sell it, then you're going to say, okay, whatever the market bears that they're going to pay for our house, we're going to split those funds. If it's a business, a lot of times people are just threatening to sell it, but nobody has any intention of selling it. The business is the way that the family makes money. It's the way that they shelter some of their expenses, sometimes even discretionary or personal expenses. And a lot of times then they might own a building that's in another LLC or an asset that actually loses money all the time, right? So you want to pull together all of those pieces of information and then either go to a financial expert or a mediation consultant, or maybe even your attorney if they're capable enough. And you're wanting to put together what is that offer, because quite frankly, you could just make an offer. Like, you don't have to necessarily have an attorney, a mediator, or anybody involved. If you could come up with that offer and give it to your spouse and see if they respond. If they don't respond, you have to take additional steps. Maybe they respond.
Yeah, I mean, I generally will work very closely with my clients when it comes to getting all the information and coming up with their expenses, and their assets and their debts, because a lot of times we find other things. And I think it's really one of the biggest advantages to using a financial professional is finding out those things that are missing, or making a determination of what your spending is. It's really important, because that forms the basis for alimony, which in New York we call maintenance. If there are children involved, it forms the basis for child support. So it behooves you to get the numbers right. And they're not always going to be right. Sometimes you just don't have the information, which is fine. But you work with the best information that you have in front of you. And I think bringing it along to the mediator's office also helps. You're putting your cards on the table, so to speak. So I think there's an expectation that the other side needs to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And nobody wants to write a book from front to back, but the mediator would love to edit the book, right? And so if you're bringing the offer to the mediator, all they're doing is kind of editing it. They're kind of, changing some things. And you also have to know like what goes into those calculations of alimony. We also call it maintenance in Missouri. So again, did you even know that it was called maintenance? When they start talking about these terms, do you know what they're talking about? Now, in Illinois, another nuance is that for child support, you get to add back accelerated depreciation if they took it in the business. Now, who the heck is going to know that, right? That is a random thing that's just happening in one state, or multiple states, who knows? But you have to also work with somebody that either is going to have some knowledge on your state or is going to do the research and work with the attorney or, some sort of legal perspective. A lot of business valuation experts have access to case law or, things that have happened in that space. So they know a little bit more about what happens, but what is that calculation and have you run through it? In prepping for mediation or anything, the more you work with that financial person, the better you know the numbers, the better you are to then speak from authority, and or putting together that summary is going to allow you to not have to remember everything, right? You don't have to remember everything. You have to stick to the script. You have to stick to the facts. A lot of times on that summary is just factual information so that the mediator can see, oh, you have a $500,000 house, you have a $5,000 retirement, you have a $500,000 business. How are we going to split this up, right? Big picture kind of situation. We have covered so much in this. I think that people can absolutely know why you would now want to hire either a financial expert or a mediation consultant to help you create the settlement offer, to help you negotiate during the mediation. If you could have somebody in the mediation with you, I would recommend not choosing somebody in your family that's going to be instigative. And a lot of times they may not allow you to have family members or support teams. So, can you have a financial expert? Can you both hire somebody that gives you a financial perspective? And you're going to be negotiating during this mediation. So you need your whole team to be on the same page. So easy questions that you could ask your team right now is, what are we going to do to prep for mediation? When are we going to meet and prep for mediation? Can we do a run through of what I should expect going into the mediation? And do we have a settlement offer that we can offer in advance of the mediation to at least the mediator, if not all parties? Transparency in the financials, when they're complicated, people need time to make decisions. And so if you give them some time, then when you enter into the mediation, I think it can be more fruitful. I think you could actually have a chance at settling. And then having an expectation that one mediation is not going to do it will help prepare you for the fact that this could be a little bit of a marathon or maybe a 5K, right? It's going to be a process that could be several mediations over time to move it forward, maybe to get the documents, and then you come back. So maybe we talk about kid stuff because we need to get a valuation, and we'll come back in a month to talk about the money part, right? So what are some of the other things that you would suggest if somebody's kind of at the first stage of this process?
Well, I think, I think that if you can get the financial expert in as the neutral, working with both sides, I think that is the ideal situation, because the expert is working with both of you. The expert knows what both of you need. The expert has to be impartial and independent. So I think that is the ideal situation. If you can have that situation, then you should definitely hire someone that is not necessarily known, but that is assisting you and helping you from your perspective, so that you have a better idea what you need. I find, look, I'd say the best part of my job is when the light bulb goes on for my client and they can internalize all of the financial education that I have given them. And that's when they're armed so that they can go into the mediation understanding all the financial information. I mean, I'm not there with them. So if you're armed with the financial information, you can come up with your own questions. You understand what you need. You understand what's missing. You have a basic understanding of what's going on, and maybe by the time I'm done with you, a higher level of understanding of what's going on. It's all education, I think, and information so that you're in the best position that you can possibly be in.
Yeah. And if you're going into mediation alone, because that's the structure that's in your state, having those summaries that you can give to everyone, not that has your handwritten, not that has all of your thoughts and ideas, but really what you have is when you're talking with the consultant or the mediation consultant, and then you're talking with your legal team, you have the telephone game. So they're telling you stuff. You're trying to remember it. You're trying to regurgitate it back to the mediator or the other side. And if you get it wrong, it's just lost in translation. So if you have that guide that maybe even the attorney or the legal consultant, mediation consultant put together and help you put together, if you do it in a very clean manner, it can be given to somebody. It can be allowed so that you're actually pushing over that offer in its exact nature, that maybe you don't understand all of the pieces, but it's already formatted. It's in a way that everybody understands, and we're not playing the telephone game, because sometimes people will leave that mediation and still negotiate, right? Still go back and forth with emails to fine tune it. And you may not even have to go back to a formal mediation. So those are some kind of big picture things about specifically divorce mediation, maybe some tactics that we've used as a financial, experts and consultants that would benefit our viewers. As a final thing, I think that we should talk a little bit about how people can reach out to you, and what you can help them with. And if you do work not only in New York, but around the country, maybe you can give a little bit of information about yourself.
Yeah, I do. So I'm a CPA and I'm certified in financial forensics and business valuation. I've also been trained in divorce mediation and collaborative divorce. So I'm also certified as a CPA down in Florida as well. I have done work not only in the tri-state area, but around the country. So I think a lot of the processes are very similar. There's still a basic level of education that one needs to get. So, call with any questions. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to get on a 15-minute phone call with someone. And thank you so much, Melissa, for the opportunity today and the conversation.
Yeah, I think this is great. So we'll continue this process. Maybe we'll have questions that come up about some of this, and we'll continue to guide people to really being your own advocate, and taking control of the divorce in a way that seems rational and reasonable and doable. And so we'll continue to give tips on how you can take control of your divorce and include people like us or include lawyers into your strategy. And your life the best. Allow those experts to just come in and kind of cultivate and give you some knowledge about what is reasonable in this space. And then you will have a better outcome. You will set your expectations for something that is reasonable. And quite frankly, that is how mediation could work best, that both sides come and say, what is reasonable for the family, and how can this be an okay arrangement for both of us? Not a super win for either one. In mediation, sometimes both of you will walk away mildly discontent. And that probably is still a very good deal for both of you, because there's only so much to split. So I appreciate you always providing your insight, and it's great to talk to a fellow forensic and business valuation expert. So thank you, Rosalia. We'll see you soon.